ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
The one and only Helen Garner returns to Conversations today. At 82, Helen is one of our most critically acclaimed writers and also one of our most loved. Helen's steady, penetrating eye, her humour and her elegant vernacular bring depth to whatever subject she's writing about, whether it's a criminal case or a love affair. She describes her new book, The Season, as a nana's book about footy. Helen spent last year's footy season going along to her grandson's under-16s Aussie Rules training sessions and games. So it's partly a book about footy, a game that Helen is passionately devoted to, even if she doesn't fully understand the rules. It's also a book about the different seasons of life that she and her youngest grandchild, named Ambrose or Amby, are in. As she writes, a record of a season we are spending together before he turns into a man and I die. I spoke with Helen Garner in the beautiful Elder Hall at Adelaide University. So we're going to begin with a reading right from the beginning of the book.
This is something I learned from Elizabeth Jolly. She told me once, if you're going to read from a book, always start on page 1, because you don't have to do it the backstory. That's one of the most useful pieces of advice anyone ever gave me. Okay, this is just the first 2 pages. I pull up at the curb. I love this park they train in. I must have walked a figure of 8 round its ovals hundreds of times at dawn, in winter and summer, to throw the ball for Dozer, our red heeler. But he's buried now in the backyard under the crepe myrtle near the chook pen. The boy jumps out with his footy and trots away, bouncing it. Boy? Look at him. He's been playing with our suburban club since he was a tubby little 8-year-old. I've never paid more than token attention to his sporting life. But this year he's in the under-16s. The shoulders on him. He must be almost 6 feet tall. He's the youngest of my 3 grandchildren, the last, and there will be no more. At breakfast time I say, can I start coming to training? What? Why? I don't know, I've got no work, I'm burnt out. I don't know what to do with myself, I need something to write about. You better ask the coach. Who's the coach? We've got a new one, it's Archie. What? The Archie we know? Isn't he only a boy? How old is he? About 20, says Amby's mum, who remembers important facts. Can you be a coach when you're only 5 years older than the players? Under an umbrella outside the cafe, tall and skinny, white t-shirt and baseball cap. Is that him? I come up behind him and he turns. Pale skin, bright blue eyes with black lashes, face-splitting grin, clever, funny, jumping out of his skin, ready to pick up a thought and go with it. Footy, he says, is the most hilariously unnatural sport. Running backwards? He's at uni. He gets what I'm after. Will I have to ask the club? Nah, just turn up. What about the players? Helen, they're 15. They're boys. They won't care. And 5 minutes later, they'll have forgotten you were even there. They're 15-year-old boys trying to be men. He tips back his head in a fit of laughter.
So really that introduction in Helen's beautifully simple, clear prose gives a précis of the whole book, of everything that's explored in the season. And I just love the bold simplicity of those first 2 lines, you know. I love this park they train in. There's a lot of skill to say something so frankly.
Yes, I found this book a very hard one to start. I didn't know how to start. I reckon I had about 20 false starts and they were so boring, and they were in like about, when did I first think about football? How long is it since blah, blah, you know, that sort of crap. And then one day I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll just shift the whole thing into present tense. And as soon as I did that, boom, away it went. I could hardly keep up. It was just out of a choice of despair. You know, I really didn't know how to go in.
But the choice to do something, to write something as simple as, I love this park they train in, it's interesting that that took so much work, so much editing to get to some statement like that.
Well, it actually contains quite a lot of information. This park, I love it. Must mean I've been there before. Who are they? We don't know yet. And what's the training? What are they doing? You know, there's packed into that sentence, there's a whole lot of questions, or hooks, I suppose you could call them.
And even in that first paragraph where there's the reference to your departed dog, he's buried now in the backyard, there's already this little nod to impermanence and death, which is sort of one of the notes of this book this season. So tell us a little about your grandson, about Amby. How much have you had to do with him as he was growing up?
Oh, a lot. Because before he was even born, I came back. I'd lived in Sydney for a couple of years and I was married, and the marriage broke up, and I came back to Melbourne. And my daughter and her husband said to me, look, the house next door to us is on the market. Why don't you buy it, sell your other house and live next to us, and we'll take the fence down. I go, what? They want me? You know, that awful misery after a marriage is broken down. You think no one will ever love me again, and suddenly I'll get this invitation. So I moved in next door, and so I've known him all his life, and I've helped to raise him, and his brother and his sister as well.
And for you, you know, you have one child, a daughter, and your first grandchild was a girl. And then you have these two grandsons who came along. What was it like to suddenly have little boys in your life? What was that like?
Oh, it was very surprising because I mean, there was 6 kids in my family. I'm the oldest, and one of them is a boy, and he was the second youngest. And so I was much older than he was, and so we never sort of like played together or knew each other as children. And so I come from sort of girl land, and my only child was a girl, and suddenly there were these very different kind of creatures.
What was different about them?
Yeah, that's a really hard question to answer. They were just different in some metabolic way, and they were. And as they got, I mean, as babies, they weren't all that different, I suppose, but their imaginative life seemed to be different. When my first grandchild was born, I mean, we just took one look at each other and understood each other immediately. I felt that, you know, we never had to sort of get to know each other because we were both female and girls, and we, you know, had a wonderful time with her. And then the second one was a boy, and he was so wildly different from her. You know, he had this. He had a huge imaginative life, and he was always dressing up, and he was a cowboy for ages, and you know, he made me play parts in his imaginative world, and you know, he'd come in from the backyard carrying a bow and arrow and say, here's some cattle meat, will you cook it? And I'd say, sure, cowboy, how do you want it cooked? He'd say, toasted please with butter. So there was some. Yeah, I got drawn into their play lives a lot, particularly him, the middle one.
Were you surprised by the sort of softness and delicacy of little boys?
Oh, yeah, they're so sort of woundable. I felt that girls, you know, my experience, girls kind of roll with the punches of life, and boys really, I think young boys suffer a lot in their lives, and they're not supposed to admit that they suffer. I mean, I don't mean they're in torment. I just mean that life is hard for them, and things are expected of them that are hard for them to deal with, and when they get to school, anyway.
What about footy? So that's you and your relationship with your grandson, with Amby. What about footy? Did you grow up caring about AFL, VFL?
No, I didn't. I mean, when I was a student, I had a friend who was very keen on Carlton, and you know, I used to go to the footy with him just for the hell of it because he was fun to be around. But then I didn't really care about it, and the years went by, and I. But when I became a sort of hands-on nana, my son-in-law is a kind of rusted-on Western Bulldogs follower of Aussie rules, and football was this very live thing in the family, and I thought, well, this is fun. If I get into this, I'm going to have some fun, and I saw this video, this little documentary on TV, because when I came back, before I bought the house next door to them, for a while I lived in this little sort of rented house all alone in my glorious, broken-hearted solitude. And so I watched a lot of TV, and I saw this documentary which was called The Year of the Dogs. It was about the Western Bulldogs, and I was very taken by it because it was like, sort of brief history of the game. And it's a working class team, Footscray it used to be called, sort of a Western suburbs team, and it wasn't a very successful team, and I think it had only ever won the flag once. And so the poor old Western Bulldogs were, they looked a bit kind of browbeaten, and their captain at the time was a bloke called Chris Grant, who's known for his noble character. And they said, the interviewer said to him, how come you stayed with Footscray? How come you didn't go to one of these really flash teams that are, sort of winners? And he said, well, I got a letter from a little boy, and the letter said, "Dear Chris Grant, please don't leave. I haven't got much money. Here's all I can give." And he'd pasted a 50-cent coin onto the letter. And so the footballer says, "So I couldn't leave, could I?" And when he said that, I just got straight out of my chair and I went to the computer with my credit card and I joined the club. I thought, it was the first time I thought, I get it, these people are kind of moral. But it was just this really sweet story that he told. But
it's like something out of Dickens. I don't have much money, sir, but what I have is yours.
Yes, exactly.
And that was enough for you.
I never forgot that moment, and so I started to follow the footy, and I just started watching it on TV. It's no point going, I can't understand it, and they have all these awful ads and everything going on. But I just started watching, and we all watched together as a family, and I got right into it.
How good are you on the strategies, the techniques, the elements of play?
No, I hardly even understand the rules, and that's one of the things about the book that I kept thinking when I was trying to figure out what sort of book it was going to be. I kept coming across things that people would say to me, or that Amby would say to me, and I had no idea what the term meant. I said, well, "What position do you play?" I said naively, and he said,
Midfield.
Midfield. I go, I don't even know what that is. And I mean, even simple things like that had to be explained to me. And I thought, well, I'm really quite ignorant. Now, what can I do about this ignorance? Am I going to go and look it up in some book or even on the internet? And I thought, no, I don't want to write that sort of book. Because a lot of people would say to me, "Oh, what are you writing?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm writing about my grandson's football team, his footy team." And they'd go, "Oh, yeah, and what sort of book is it going to be?" And they all thought it was going to be some sort of polemic about footy. And I thought, I have to do everything in my power to make it not a polemical analysis of football. But then I thought, well, don't worry about that, Hal, because you actually don't know anything about the game. So when these things came up, there's this thing called the sub rule, and it's got something to do with, someone's injured and whether people that are on the sub bench, when they're allowed to go onto the something like that, and it's very important. But people would say, "Oh, they've made some changes to the sub rule," and I think, what will I do now? And so I said to this friend of mine, I said, I was talking to this friend, and he was saying that he was an Essendon follower, and he'd been to every Essendon game with the same 4 people every week since he was 11. And I said, "Great, you can tell me about the changes in the sub rule." And he said, "I can and I will." I mean, he sat up like that, he straightened his spine. And So he gave me this crystalline explanation of the sub rule. I thought, oh, all right, I get it. That's fantastic. I actually understand it. And I went home, you know, full of pleasure with myself, and how clever I was and everything. And I woke up the next morning. I couldn't remember a single thing that he said, not a single thing. It's not that it was blurry. And I thought, well, there's obviously, you know, I've got a bit of cognitive decline happening here. But I thought, well, I don't care about the sub rule. That's what this taught me.
Well, you're not watching it for that. So what are you watching, those professional football games? If we just stay like when you're watching the Bulldogs, what are you watching for? What are you looking at when you look at a game?
I'm looking for noble and glorious sporting behaviour, if you want to know. No, but I want to... I've come to the conclusion that I don't really mind all that much when the Western Bulldogs don't win. I don't get broken-hearted. But I see my son-in-law, when the Western Bulldogs play badly or stupidly or the coaches put somebody in the wrong position and we've collapsed and been thrashed, he's just got a broken heart. You know, he really suffers from it. And when I began to realise that, I thought, this game goes very deep in people, particularly in men, but also in women. I think that there's something. I think it's a game of great glory and beauty. You know, the classic AFL body is tall and long and with long. It's not kind of a glamorous little chunky soccer player.
Can I just say backstage, Helen's been running quite a line against soccer for quite
I'm not against
the last hour.
I'm not against it.
Some background
I just think they should be allowed to score more. But I also think they shouldn't have to not use their arms. Because, you know, when I watch a soccer match, I think this is like watching Irish dancing. It's kind of, there's something rigid about it and repressed. And also, because this is why they have brawls and we don't. Because, you know, you're so frustrated at the end of a soccer game, there's hardly any score, and you haven't what my grandson calls get your anger out. It's not, and so that's why the first thing they want to do when they leave the ground is punch someone in the face.
Unlike AFL, where they do peacefully. That's what you love, when they shake hands at the end of even a
Oh yeah, I love that. Well, don't they do that in soccer as well?
I think they probably do.
But yeah, I like the rituals of games, and I think they're really important. And I think,
like what? What are some of the rituals?
Oh well, I mean the rituals there are wonderful rituals like. When the umpires walk on at the beginning, how they hold the ball right up like that, and it's almost like it's almost what you would call a hieratic gesture. You know, it's like something you would see in a religious ceremony. And I think for a lot of people that football is, I mean, all sorts of sport maybe, but are often connected with the sort of same religious urge in people. You know, and that's why those movements are so important, because I noticed that particularly during the lockdowns, in pandemic lockdowns, that they played games without crowds. No, but people couldn't go to the footy, so they played the matches anyway, and I watched them on TV, and it was so extraordinary to see them playing in silence. You could hear them shouting, which you can't normally hear. They were yelling to each other and communicating with each other all the time. And you could hear the boot go into the ball. It was terribly moving to me. It was like some more primitive version of a religious ceremony. I found it really marvellous.
You've written, I mean, it just, when you're describing that, it reminds me of the way you've written about watching ballet dancers sort of rehearse, or when you've talked about the formality and ritual of the court, that elevates all of the proceedings. I mean, there seem lots of crossovers. Another thing that you really pay attention to when you watch the football are the haircuts. They matter to you.
Well, yeah, they are interesting, but especially because when you watch on TV and there's a lot of close-ups, and really some of them are so awful. I mean, you know, those ones where it's what they call a high fade, where they're sort of almost shaved right up to there, and then there's that stupid little fringe at the front.
Amby, your grandson, explained to you why he got a mullet himself for playing football. What's great about the mullet for football players?
Well, I always wondered, and I finally saw, he went to WOMAD and came back with a mullet. He told me how he got the mullet. He was in the crowd and he said, I saw somebody was holding up a broomstick, and on the broomstick it had a sign saying, free haircuts. And he said, I thought, cool, I'll get a mullet. So he goes up to them, and there was a couple of girls there with this sign saying, we'll cut your hair. And when he went up to them and said, I'd like a haircut, and one of them says, cool, we got someone. I thought that was a really bad sign. I would have left immediately if it had been me. But anyway, so they hacked him this terrible mullet, and he had quite thick hair, and it was, I mean, to me it was pretty gruesome, but he was very pleased. And so I said to him at a certain point, why is a mullet appropriate for footy? And he said, oh, it's because when you run, it flows behind you. So it's an aesthetic show-off thing.
This park that his team plays at, the Colts train at, that you love, what does it look like? Can you describe it?
The ground?
Yeah.
Well, it's actually there are 3 ovals there. It's in the inner west in Melbourne, near the Maribyrnong River. And it's got quite lovely old trees there. And so lots of people walk their dogs there, or there's lots of people go running clubs, run around there.
And when you first turned up, when Amby gave you the nod that you could turn up and hang out during his training, like, where did you position yourself? How did you set yourself up at that field?
Well, see, I didn't want to, nobody wants his nana there when he's doing all that blokey stuff. So I thought, well, I have to back off and make myself unobtrusive. There was a kind of a boundary rail, that you could lean on if you wanted to stand up. There were no seats or anything. There was one bench. It was right up there near the skate park. And I thought, oh, I'll sit on that bench. And I sat on it, but I was too small, and the boundary rail just went straight across there. So I was sitting like this. And then I realised I could sit right up on the back of it, so I perched up there. But I was trying to be unobtrusive. But I had this stupid hat on all the time because...
Even at night?
Yeah, well, I had to, because when we got the bright lights, the thing is, I'd had cataract surgery. See, this is an old lady's story. I'd had cataract surgery, and bright light was very uncomfortable for me, so I needed to have a hat on just to, just cut it out like that. So I had this hat on. And actually, when the coach, Archie, when I showed him the book when it was finished, the first thing he said was, Helen, why don't you get yourself a decent coat? Because he said, in every training, you said you were cold and shivering. Why don't you get a coat?
Forget the hat, put on a coat. Yeah. Were you ever bored? You were going to training twice a week, sitting there with your hat and your overalls watching. Were you ever bored?
Well, sometimes my concentration would wane, and I would think, am I bored? And I'd think, no, it's not bored. It wasn't boredom. I loved being there. I loved being in the park because, well, as the sun sets and the buildings have lovely light shining on them, and it's a beautiful time of day, and I wouldn't normally be out at that time. And I loved being there and watching the light fade, and it was actually quite beautiful often. And often I was the only grown-up there, because some of the fathers would come occasionally, but not many of the mothers would come, because it's like 6 to 7:30, and they're home getting the tea for the younger kids. And occasionally a father would show up, and he'd just sort of lean on the rail, and we'd nod to each other, and I'd say, which one's yours? And they'd say, and then we'd compare notes. Everybody liked to praise everyone else's kids. I'd say, Buff is your son. He's fantastic. What a great little player. And then when I say, oh, well, I'm Ambrose's nana, and he'd say, oh, I remember him from back in the under-10s. He always went in hard. That was a great compliment.
You mentioned earlier that what you're watching when you watch the professional players isn't strategy or even necessarily the rules, certainly not the sub-rules, but you're looking for this sort of noble valour. And I think I want you to explain a bit more about why you see this activity of men and boys kicking a ball and running around a field to be Homeric, to have this kind of ancient, heroic aspect to it. What is it about this game that makes it have all those echoes for you?
Well, it's not Homeric all the time. Only sometimes does it get Homeric. I'm in a reading group and we'd read the Iliad. And when you read the Iliad, it's really amazing how it reminds you of football. You know, in the awful parts where everyone's hacking and slashing, and everyone and bodies. But the things that I was really moved by were when somebody would get hurt, and how the other players would behave when someone was hurt.
This is Conversations with Sarah Kanowski. Hear more conversations anytime on the ABC Listen app.
Helen Garner is back on Conversations today. We're discussing her new book, The Season, about the months she spent following her grandson's under-16s footy team and why she finds AFL to be a game of true heroism and valour.
I've got this beautiful photo of the captain of the Western Bulldogs. Is a magnificent player. His name is Marcus Bontempelli, and he's, I don't know, about 6'10". But he's a very modest, he has a very modest character. He's a beautiful player, but never shows off, and he doesn't do all that, you know, that sort of show-offy stuff. But, you know, he's a god to me. And I hope I never meet him, because I just admire him so much. But there's a famous photo where another player in the team who's known to have gone back to play after he'd had a knee reconstruction. And in this particular match, his knee had gone on him, you know, and he went down and he was in terrible pain. And there's a beautiful photo of Bontempelli helping him off the field. And they've just been thrashed, you know, they're coming off the field in defeat. They're two enormous guys, and the wounded one, he's got one of those man buns and it's falling down and it's all a mess and he's stumbling along. And Bontempelli, he's got his arm around him and he's leaning his head against the injured man's shoulder. And you can see these four enormous hands in the photo. They have these huge hands and they're stumbling off the ground, but the position that they're in, the posture they take, you know, that he's helping his comrade off the ground, it's straight out of Virgil or Homer, just some of those descriptions of how somebody's frightfully injured and he's got a spear in him and somebody else helps him out of his chariot to a place of shelter. And things like that. And also sometimes in the actual play, sometimes, I noticed this long before I ever thought of writing about it, I noticed that sometimes players will adopt spontaneously postures of athletes that you see in ancient Greek sculpture. I mean, they'll go down on one knee with their arms like this, or there's postures of despair. They're the most interesting ones. I mean, everybody can do the raging Achilles one, but and also sometimes when a player has done something that he obviously didn't think he was going to be able to do, like he's just marked the ball, they're 5 points down and the siren goes and he's standing ready to kick and he thinks, oh my God, you know, if I miss this, the whole season's done. And he kicks it goes through perfectly. And they'll go down like this, right down like that, in that posture of kind of like helpless, whatever it is, triumph or relief, or these enormous emotions are played out on the field. And I think that's why football and sport in general is important, because I think there's a kind of big well of emotion in most people that doesn't get expressed. And I think that a beautiful game can express them or draw them to the surface in some way. So that's why you feel satisfied when you see when someone just mark a ball beautifully. You think, God, people are really, you know, human beings can do splendid things. There's something about us which is splendid. And lately, you know, because of all this Trump stuff that's going on and so loathsome, that sort of awful masculinity that you see on parade in those circumstances, I didn't think that when I was writing the book, I didn't think I'd like to do this as a gesture against all that. But when I'd finished the book and all the horrors of Trump's re-election happened, I just thought this to me is this is my little blow against that moronic abyss that he's dragging us into. And just I wanted to sort of pay tribute to the beauty of human society, I suppose. I do feel that very strongly, and that's one of the things I learnt from following this team. That, see, I mean, I'm just a writer. I sit in a room by myself all day and I don't know anything about teams or how people cooperate and run a team or play in a team is a mystery to me. But I began to understand how the boys' parents were, they're the people that should be getting orders of Australia. They give up their time to run these teams, and coaches, I think coaches are wonderful people because they're giving these kids a moral training, and that struck me again and again.
I want to bring you back to that photo that you've got as the wallpaper on your phone, which is my favourite new Helen Garner fact, that you've got that picture of those two footballers on your phone. But you had another photo of footballers that your grandchildren had disapproved of on your phon.
Yeah.
What was that one? They made you delete it.
They tried to make me delete it. Well, it was when, I think it was left over from when my second grandson, Amby's bigger brother, was in a team. In his team there was a very small boy, much smaller than any of the other boys, and I greatly admired this kid because he was so gutsy, and he was smaller than the others by about that much. And so one day he was walking off the field at the end of the game, and there was a huge boy on either side of him, and he was in the middle, and they were sort of walking off in that. They were all covered in dirt, and I thought, God, that kid is really gutsy. So I just snapped a picture of him, and I had it on my phone. And my phone was on the dining room table or something, and somebody looked at it and they said, "Why have you got a photo of this boy on your phone, Helen? It's disturbing." That was the word they used. The kids, they said to me, "This is disturbing that you've got this photo here." And I said, "What do you mean disturbing?" They said, "You shouldn't have a photo of a kid on your phone." And I thought, really? I was quite shocked. And I tried to argue back. I said, "But he's so brave. I admired his bravery." And they were they weren't actually saying it, but it sounded like they thought I was like perving on this little boy. He was like 9 or something, But
it's those two photos are kind of part of the thematic structure of the season, because on the one hand, there's the photo of these two mighty warriors supporting one another, and then there's the photo of this little short kid with his slightly taller but still little kids, and it's your grandson Amby is kind of in between those two. It's like that between phase of 15, that really heartbreaking moment of adolescence where at some points you look at them and you think, oh, you're the little kid, and the other points when you're watching him play and you see him caught up in the energy of the game, you see this man. And a lot of the season, a lot of this book is about you watching him on that shifting horizon between those two states.
Well, a lot of the time it was terribly shocking to me, those moments where it amazes me now that when I think how big the boys were. I mean, my grandson, he's nearly 6 foot tall, so he is big, and he's a lot bigger than me. But even the little boys, the little ones, the little skinny ones in the team, at certain moments they just seemed big. And all of them had broken voices. So when you hear them shouting, they're shouting in men's voices. But so when you get closer to them, you see their faces are still soft from childhood. They're still children. And sometimes I'd see my grandson, at quarter time, and the game would stop, and there was a time when I became the orange lady. That was so exciting. But he, I'd look at his face and he looked like a madman. You know, his face was deeply flushed and sweat was pouring off his face, and sometimes he'd have a big piece of cotton all sticking out of his nose, which was all bloody. And I'd think, oh my God, he's not a boy anymore. He's just this huge man. And then, you know, I'd see him at home just doing what he was doing as a boy, and he'd be a child again. It's a very cusp sort of, I never know if that's the right word for it, but there's some area in their age where they can flick one way or the other.
And it's brief, isn't it? It is a season. It's a year or two, and then they're on the other side. Yeah. The violence that you describe, that you see as part of the game of AFL, both just the nature of it being a rough physical game and when fights or brawls break out, what was it like to see him, your beloved grandson, out on the field at risk of that? Did you have to steel yourself to watch him in that?
No, I loved watching him because he was actually, during the season, he made his footy playing improved enormously. I mean, I think it takes a while for a boy to realise that how strong he's become. Since last season, suddenly, he had these massive shoulders on him, and I could see that he wasn't afraid. He wasn't scared. And so I thought, there's no point in my projecting my fear onto him.
He reflected a lot about tackling. That almost seemed to be the heart of what he loved most about playing, was tackling. And he talked about it with his older brother and other kids. Why was that so special?
Oh, well, he just stated it outright. He said, I love tackling because you're actually hurting someone and you're doing physical harm to someone, but, and he says, you hear him groan and then he gets up and runs on and everyone forgets about it. And that's something else I discovered about them, that they don't remember anything about the game. I mean, when the coach would say, what was the score at half-time? And they wouldn't have a clue. But because they're sort of in the moment in some... I would think about, sometimes I'd look at him, those sort of marks, and he'd be all bloody, and I'd think, oh, gee, that's awful, and I hope he doesn't do a knee, or, you sort of worry about a serious injury, but, he'd have these, like, claw marks on him, bloody claw marks from somebody's cleats, what do you call them? They're spikes. Yeah.
You overhear or you listen to a few conversations that Amby has with his dad about violence, about that impulse to want to hurt someone and how to handle it. What did you kind of learn about violence and men, do you think, by listening to that and watching all that?
I just think I learned how much what an urge to violence they have, but much more than women and girls do, I think. And, I watch the girls playing football, and I know that girls, one thing they love about playing AFL is they love tackling. They've never been able to tackle in games before, so when they play AFL, they love it. But I think the thing about it is that there are rules about it. There are rules that... And I find the other thing that I found was that there's a kind of... that men have devised these behaviours which make it all right to have hurt someone. Another, a player. I was watching TV one night and one of our players, Bailey Smith is his name, headbutted a Geelong player. And I'd never seen a headbutt before, and it's really horrible. It's like the head lashes out like a snake striking, and the guy goes down like this, he sort of reeled back and a great big red mark appeared on his face, and I thought, oh, that's awful, that's really disgusting, and I sort of hated our guy for having done it. But then at the end of the match, when everyone was milling around shaking hands and doing all the gracious things, I saw the guy who'd been injured by Bailey Smith. He was caught by the camera and he was walking along like this with his hand out, and he was in the frame all by himself. And I thought, what's he doing? Is he going towards Bailey Smith after what happened, shake his hand? And they widened the shot and you could see that he was walking towards Bailey Smith. Bailey Smith turns to him, they shake hands warmly, and then they walk away with their arms around each other's shoulders like this, laughing. And I'm going, oh, that's really I told this when I told this to the coach, I said, "Man, I couldn't believe what I just saw," and he laughed and he said, "Hal, that's men," and I was terribly impressed by it.
Impressed?
Well, yeah, because I must have gained a skin or two. I lost a few skins. Sometimes things made me cry a lot. Like, for example, when Buddy Franklin retired, and I mean, he's a god of the game, a splendid player, and he was it was his last game, and all these Collingwood players booed him. They booed him, and I just burst into tears. I thought, that is really one of the ugliest things I've ever seen. It was uglier than seeing somebody headbutt Josh Toohey, and that's weird. Maybe I should see someone about that. I haven't compared them really.
It's the physical violence is kind of controlled within those rules, while the moral character is bigger in a way. It's not regular.
Well,
That's up to the player.
It has to be bigger. It can't just nibble at the edges. What the coach said to me, Archie, when we talked about the violence, he said, "Look, the thing about it is it's a dangerous game." He said, and it's no point pretending it's not. And every time you go out onto the field, you know that there's a chance that you could get quite badly hurt. He said, but we love it. We love it. And the boys love it. They love it. They want to do it. It's not that everyone's saying, go out there or else you'll be punished.
And do you think it sublimates or has some cathartic effect on what that anger would need to come out elsewhere?
Well, I think so, and that's what Ambrose said to me a couple of times. If he's training, I'd say, "How did you train?" He'd say, "Oh, no good." I said, "I watched you. You were playing well." And he said, "I didn't get my anger out," and I think that's one of the things that the game is for, to bring out those destructive things and give them a form in which they can be played out.
Early on in your season, watching his team train, you registered that you're feeling envy. What for exactly?
Oh, just because they're so young and I'm so old. I could just see what a wonderful time they were having when they were at training, and when the coach, he was a terrific coach and he really had them on the run, and he knew how to make it wonderful for them. And they were just happy. I'd say they'd be laughing and shouting with joy just because they were being taught these skills.
When you say the envy then is about age, which of course makes sense, I wondered also if there was some gender inflection to it too, because you also talk about watching how these boys just chuck down their phones and their bikes and take off and don't care about their stuff. They're not careful. And it's like this rough wildness that they're allowed and encouraged seemed somehow you watching on but not able to, I don't know. So I felt the envy was around that as well. That there was a freedom about them as boys, not just young, but as boys.
Yeah. Yes. I think I envied their sort of groupness, the fact that they were playing together. And I really loved watching them turn up at training. Sometimes they'd come from every which way. Someone would get out of his dad's car, or someone would be walking across from the station carrying a ball, or they'd sort of walk with purpose towards, and they'd all stand around the coach, and they all have this, that's what they call it, that's the DAP thing they do. You have to greet everybody like that. You can touch their hand, and when they arrive, the coach does that to each of them. It's just this little gentle tap. Ambrose is always teaching me how to do that DAP routine where you've got to go whack like that with the hand, and then you grab the fingers and then it falls down. But that makes a noise. You've got to get the round part of the hollow part of your palms to hit, and that's when it's a proper one. But I'm not very good at it. And he say, "You've got to relax, Hel, relax."
When in the section you read at the beginning where you were proposing this to Ambrose, you said, "I've got no work, I'm burnt out, I don't know what to do with myself, I need something to write about." What would it have meant for you to do what other grandparents do, which is just go along and watch? Why the need to write?
Well, just because that's the only thing I know how to do, really. I mean, it's the only thing I'm any good at.
But how has the experience become different for you once you start writing about it?
That's hard to answer. I don't know if I can answer that.
Is it about attention? Because you kind of say, I'd just be sitting here, but because I've got to write something, I'm going to take notice differently. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's true that if you've got a notebook and you know later you're going to have to... I knew I was going to have to take a lot of notes because I'm starting to, lose my memory a bit, and I'd have to take... I would forget people's turn of phrase, or I'd forget the colours of the sky on that particular night, which was... Yeah, well, that's true, actually. If you know you're going to write something, your attention is cranked up to the max. You could just sit there and dream about something else, but I wouldn't be interested in doing that.
When I was reading this, Helen, which is a book of so much love, but it's such a sweet, poignant love, and I was thinking about the contrast with all the ways you'd written about love in all of your earlier work, which is often so tormented and painful and anguished. It's like this is a really... There are still times when you act the fool around him, where you want his attention, or you want to make him laugh, or you were trying to connect. But there's such a different freedom in this kind of love compared to the sort of love you wrote about as a younger person.
Oh, that's for sure. But, that was the most wonderful thing that ever happened to me, was to give up on love and romance. That's when my life became happy. But it's true, when I came back from Sydney after a total smash-up end of a marriage, I thought, okay, well, that's that. I've done that. I've been married 3 times, stuffed it up 3 times. I'm not going back there. And I'm just not interested anymore. So then I looked, but then, of course, that's when I became a grandmother. And I knew that I would like to be a grandmother, but, and I knew that if I did, I could be very useful to my daughter and her husband and just be like a backup person who lived next door. And that's the way it worked out. But I think being a grandmother is the best thing that has happened to me, bar none, in my entire life. It brought me so much love and joy.
Differently, how different from as a mother? What's the difference?
Oh, well, with a mother, you kind of... Well, as a grandmother, as a grandparent, you sort of probably aren't working anymore. You're not in the moment of your life when you've got to sort of cut it out there in the world. And also as a grandparent, you're not where the buck stops. You can apply the sort of discipline that you require from your grandchildren, but I don't know, I think there's some anxiety that comes between a parent and a child that's not there with grandparents. It's more free.
When your grandkids were babies, you wrote at the time about how it took the sting out of your literary ambition in a way. It gave you something else to care about. Do you remember feeling like that? How it shifted your sense of needing to getting public acclaim because you had this different locus of meaning in your life?
Yeah. Did I say that somewhere?
You did. I'll show it to you.
Well, that's
true?
Quite noble, but I can't say
Well, I think
I remember it.
When your granddaughter was born and maybe you weren't included in a list of writers or something, but you had a vision of yourself walking along a road with a little girl talking to her.
Oh, that's nice. I've forgotten that. I was probably one of the many prizes that I didn't win, Well, the thing about being a grandmother, of course, is you feel really useful, and you think, I've got a place to stand. I don't have to fight for it anymore. There's a job here and I can do it.
And do you think not having that romantic relationship opened up the space for you emotionally to have that kind of connection that you've got?
Yeah, probably, but I guess, a lot of grandparents are still married and, they've still got a marriage going and it's a happy relationship and they share their love for I imagine, I don't know, but I just feel, this incredible stroke of luck that happened to me.
What does Amby think of this book that you've written about him and his team?
Well, when I asked him if it was okay, is it okay if I write about it? Yeah, he said, yeah, go right ahead. And then he said he was trying to do cool things on the field at training so he'd be in the book. But But then he just forgot about me being there, I think. But, well, I showed him a draft. Whenever I write a book about real people, always have this feeling that I thought if they don't like it, I won't publish it. I mean, particularly I thought that about Joe Chinque and that book. I thought if his parents don't like this book, I will happily not publish it. I'll just ditch it. But they did like it, so that was okay. But so when I had an early draft, I showed it to him, and I left it with him one day, and I went about my business. And when I got home, he was sitting out on the decking outside the back door with his back to me, and I thought, oh God, what will I say? And so I just sort of walked towards him, and he heard me coming, and he turned around and he had this great big smile on his face, and quite a sort of an emotional smile, and he said, "Thanks, Hel, for writing that." And so he liked it.
One thing you're acknowledging in the book, that this is your last grandson. He's going to become a man and you're going to die. This is what happens.
Yeah.
But this book's left for him. I thought this incredible thing that he has, his family, and if he has kids and grandkids, what a gift you've given to him as well as to everyone.
I hope he sees it that way, because the club wanted to have this little, what they call a launch for the book. Oh God, I was so touched. And they said, "Oh, Helen, this is the mums of the team." They said, "Helen, we've been thinking about having a bit of an event for the club, just to sort of pull the club together at the end of the year." And she said to me really shyly, "Would you contemplate, coming along and giving a little talk?" And I'm going, "I would love it." I just can't. And so that's what we're doing. I said to Amby, "Okay, will you come to the party?" And he goes, "No way. I'm not coming." "I can't come." "No, I won't come." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, because it'll be embarrassing." He said, "Because there's so much more about me in the book than there is about the other guys." But I don't know, as the time gets closer.
I think you should come and bring on oranges at half-time to you.
That'd be good, wouldn't it?
Please
Yeah.
join me in thanking this marvellous writer and Thank you.
Thanks.
Helen Garner's new book is called The Season. We were speaking in Elder Hall at the University of Adelaide, and a big thank you to Matilda Bookshop in the Adelaide Hills for hosting this event with Helen. This conversation was produced by Nicola Harrison. Our executive producer is Carmel Rooney. I'm Sarah Kanoski. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Sarah Kanoski. For more Conversations interviews, head to the website abc.net.au/conversations.
Hey, I'm Tyne Logan, the ABC's weather reporter. As a fan of Conversations, you must love a good story. So, you should try my new podcast. It's called The Weather That Changed Us, and it's all about the disasters that have shocked and rallied Australians, from droughts and cyclones to freak hailstorms, and how they've left lasting fingerprints on all of our lives. Search for The Weather That Changed Us on the ABC Listen app.